Good morning and welcome to my first video where I'll be studying an antique bodice in my personal collection. I'm really excited to be sharing this with everyone, as I've seen YouTubers like Abby Cox and Nicole Rudolph do videos like this for years, and I'm really happy to have a go at this myself. I think it's really cool to get to show off something like this bodice, which I would argue is my favourite, or at least one of my favourite pieces in my admittedly small personal collection of antique clothes. Now, this is a 19th century bodice, which I purchased from a shop called Snooper's Paradise in Brighton in 2023. I remember when I first saw it, I just fell in love with it. I think it's really beautiful. I'm sure any of you watching who likes antique clothes or antique shops, can resonate with that feeling when you're walking around and you see something that catches your eye across the room, and it's the only thing you can think about until you say to yourself, alright, fine, there isn't any debating to be made here, I'm getting that thing. Which arguably, I admit, is not the smartest mentality to have when you're shopping in this economy as a university student. I have a picture, or at least I think I have a picture, of the bodice when I first saw it in the shop. I just remember I was mindlessly looking around, and I look up and suddenly it's there, and frankly I fell in love right there and then. It just made my fashion historian brain go wild in the best possible way. Also, I think this bodice is not the first piece of antique clothing I have purchased at this point. In fact, I had purchased a pair of 1888 split drawers and a nightgown, possibly of the same year or so. I'm not quite sure, but I'm hoping I'll be able to make videos about these pieces, if anybody in the comments would be interested, because I'm very new to the YouTube thing, my first video and all that frightfully exciting stuff, and already I think I've fallen in love with it. I'm really happy that after years of watching YouTubers like Abby Cox, Nicole Rudolph, Zach Pinsett, Asta Darling, Carolina Zabroska, and the vintage Egyptologist, Makara Tools, and I should stop myself or I'll go on forever. But anyway, my point is that I'm so happy to be giving this a go, because for as much as I have admired these people, it's only now that I've thought about having a try myself, and between you and me, I wish I'd done this sooner because it's nothing if not fun. But all that aside, I think it's time we get to the actual point of the video. Without further ado, let's analyse my antique 1860s bodice. Now, I think this is a very interesting piece. It has very clearly been worn, as is the case for many antique pieces out there, especially of this age. It is succumbing to the ravages of time. The rows of black piping decorating the sleeves have been worn down in places, as well as being covered in dust and dirt. The centre front closure is clearly missing a few of its buttons. The beautiful black net lace trim is weathered and dusty, and coming off in many places unfortunately. The silk is shattered all over the sleeves. It looks like it's been gotten at by a wild animal, but it really hasn't. This is actually a phenomenon with 19th century silk garments, where certain types of silk fabrics called weighted silks, which are expensive silk fabrics that are produced with metal salts, have shattered due to the metallic salts that are compromising the silk strength over time. Weighted silks, which are desired for their rustle and luxurious drape, serve to make them very expensive and well manufactured at the time. Unfortunately, the shattering silks is an irreversible effect of this treatment, which, though it shows us that this bodice was likely a very luxurious piece when it would have been worn, it also has the downside of playing a big part in its increasingly poor condition over time. When I look at this bodice, I find myself imagining that there may have been a chance it could have originally had a matching skirt worn with it in its day, given the rich quality of its design and high likelihood of it being an expensive bodice. A matching skirt would have made it into a gorgeously fashionable ensemble, and maybe, if I dare let my imagination wander further, it could have even had a matching evening bodice too, once upon a time. Now, this is not to say that there was ever a matching skirt and an evening bodice, as when I purchased this bodice, it was this bodice and this bodice alone, and nothing came with it. However, the popular idea of the robular transformation, which was common from the mid-19th century and throughout the second half of the 19th century, really does make me wonder, surely the woman who owned this bodice must have been fashion conscious, given the beautiful weighted silk fabric, tasteful contrasting black piping on the sleeves, and delicate black lace trim. The idea of the robular transformation, as I have come to find in my research, was a rather clever idea that sought to be a financially viable solution to the increasing rate of ever-changing fashion trends for women during the industrial age. clothes were not as cheap as the mass-produced clothes that we buy today, given that the larger dressmaking industry was more localized. Typically, if the individual desired a new gown, or in this case, a bodice, they would go to a local dressmaker in their town or city and have the piece cut and fitted to their body by the dressmaker, rather than buying it ready-made, as one could begin to do by the end of the 19th century with the emergence of department stores and ready-made clothing. Especially for a middle or upper class consumer, the multitude of skirts and bodices in her wardrobe for the many different occasions of dress, as not only day and evening dresses, but also dinner dresses, walking dresses, reception dresses, and more were necessary for any well-to-do and fashionable woman of the 1860s, with each gown typically comprising of a matching bodice and skirt. Is it any wonder that women began resorting to have a single skirt with two bodices, rather than two separate dresses altogether? This is more convenient, cost and space-saving idea was what made the robe a la transformation so popular, as it allowed fashionable women to remain fashionable and put together without the need to drain so much of their money into a terrible excess of clothes. I feel that this bodice is very characteristic for the 1860s, given its flaring pagoda sleeves and wide sloping shoulders. If you look at the inner side of the bodice and compare it to images of the other day bodices in the 1860s, you can see how there is no centre back seam, only these two opposing curved seams which come out from the arm side and down into a sharp pinch at the back of the waist. 1860s bodices definitely tended to have lower bust lines than modern women's bodices, I know that for sure. Another feature of the interior of the bodice is how the side seams have just over half an inch seam allowance, folded out so that you can see part of the weighted silk on the inside too. The raw edges of those seam allowances were tacked down to hold the two layers together at the edges, whereas other seams on the bodice have the raw edges overcast. What is different about the side seams compared to the other seams seem to be the only ones where the seam allowance is pressed open, whereas the seams on the seam allowance are closed together with an overcast stitch and sewn down. This was definitely to allow for alterations during its time of wear, as it was common for 19th century bodices to have seams with large seam allowances, allowing for the seam to be let out and give more room for the wearer's body. Another interesting feature of the inside of the bodice, which you may have noticed, is the very large area of bust padding, with horizontal machine-sewn rows of stitching to hold it in place. You can also see it almost takes up the entire width of the front pieces, going from the side seams to the front button closure. Bust padding was actually a rather common technique found within women's bodices of this time, especially if the wearer may have been smaller busted. The padding would generally help achieve the illusion of the curvy hourglass silhouette which was sought after in the 1860s. An important thing to consider is how fashionable dress during the 19th century was all about illusion, using artificial means to make the wearer's body look as curvy as it could, without the need for tight lacing. Now, for those of you not in the know, the idea of tight lacing was not a common practice during the 19th century. Women were not lacing themselves so tightly in the corsets so that they couldn't breathe, and women were not walking around everywhere with 15-inch waists. In fact, with this bodice, it actually has a 28-inch waist, which given its size, is rather normal bodily proportions, even for today. The bust padding, the pagoda sleeves, and the dramatically curving black lace detail on the front of the bodice that curves outwards on the bust would have gone a long way to make the wearer's waist appear as small as possible, without actually having to make the waist smaller than it may have naturally been necessarily. I think that's something that's so fascinating to see when you look at original antique garments from the 19th century, particularly women's bodices. They would have been worn by women of all sorts of body shapes, with bodies like you and me. However, they used these artificial means to make their overall silhouette appear to look like it had a smaller waist than it actually did, leaving the waist as it naturally was whilst building out everything around it. It is an incredible level of engineering within clothing that many could argue we have lost today. Now, that being said, I think I've reached the end of the video. Thank you for watching. I don't know if this ending is a bit abrupt, but unfortunately I've got to end the video at some point. If you like this video, why not press the subscribe button so that you can see when my next video will pop up. You may press the like button and hopefully the YouTube algorithm will send more videos like this your way. I'm sure I'll be back again with sewing videos, antique videos and more. In the meantime, whoever and wherever you are, I hope you have a lovely day full of joy and fun, and I'll see you again next time.